Órale, bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm Jorge Martin. Gracias, everybody, for joining us. Today, we're off to the East Coast in our Beat Writer series. Maybe the team says it has a New York state of mind, but we know that it plays in the swamps of Jersey. So it's JETS, 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 Jets. This episode is going to be dedicated to one of the biggest fans, Rich Eisen, the New York Jets. And covering them is Max Goodman, who actually pulls double duty running the sites for Sports Illustrated for both the Yankees and the Jets. So kind of we caught him on an off day for the Yankees and right before training camp with the Jets. So again, he's on top of all of the new and exciting changes with the Jets, with the coaching staff and on the field. But Maxito, my friend, because he's got a great background that really ties into our podcast. Gracias for joining us. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm now realizing that I wore the green. I didn't even realize that. But yeah, I try to stay involved with both sides, and we were talking about this before we started recording, that in the next couple of months, once the NFL season really gets going, I'm going to be a busy guy. But I'm enjoying baseball right now. Excited to talk Jets with you, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Well, you mentioned a little bit. One of the things that when you were a little fired up is this being a Latino-based podcast. You wanted to share. You've got an interesting background, coming from two sides of the family. I'd love to have you share about that.
Sure. Well, I'm born and raised in New York City. I grew up. Both my parents are performing artists, so I grew up right around Times Square in Hell's Kitchen, in a very cool building where one person in the household has to be a performing artist. So I've got a lot of cool, Broadway actors, percussionists, singers, performers. All these people live in my building. But before that, and just on my mom's side, my mom's dad is born and raised in Cuba, and my mom's mom is Turkish, and so they grew up together in Cuba. Eventually moved to Miami during the Castro era and got out of there just in time. And that's where my mom and my aunt grew up, that side of the family. That's where my mom ended up meeting my dad. And then they met again in New York when their careers took them to the Big Apple to pursue the arts. And, years and years later, that's when I came to the picture. So, I speak a little bit of Spanish. I understand it really well because I talk to my grandparents. They obviously speak English too, but that's been a cool way for me to get better, and covering baseball, that's a good skill to have. So I'm hoping to get even better with that and learn as I go. I took Spanish from kindergarten all the way through college. So it's been a part of my life pretty much all the way through. And, I from the foods and the music and spending time in Miami with my grandparents and trying to eventually travel and maybe go to Cuba and see where my grandpa grew up, or at least go to, Spain and those kind of places, and Mexico and all of that. It's just so cool to have that a part of my life, despite my appearance, where maybe someone wouldn't necessarily think that I have that kind of background.
I got to tell you, you probably surprised some people when you actually, responded to them in Spanish. Where all of a sudden they probably like, oh, we can't say something bad about him behind his back.
Yeah, well, we're finally back on the field. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're back on the field.
Yeah, we're back on the field with the Yankees now that the pandemic is getting a little bit better and they've got the vaccinations and credentials are able to get us back on the field. So I'm trying to find opportunities to talk to some players, but I talked to one of the coaches who has a Hispanic background, and he was a little surprised when I told him that I can speak Spanish, and at least a little bit. I'm not fluent. I don't want to mislead you there, but I can understand it. Like, before the translators give the English answers when Spanish players are talking on Zoom or in press conferences or whatever, I can usually get a gist of what they're trying to say, which is it's a cool perk to have. I definitely want to try to get it closer and closer to fluency as I go.
And you know what, just using it. And I will say, just from my 8 years in baseball, it was, you see such a difference in the ball players when you interview them in their native tongue, because it's just like the answers are more rich, they're more well thought out. It's just it's great trait, great way to be be bilingual in baseball. a extra tool, and the sixth tool when it comes to writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, you grew up on the with Cubano in your background, and you said you shared offline it was Maxito, but now you've outgrown that a little bit. But there's so much great with the music. Obviously, when you've got performing artists in your family, you've got the music and the food. Tell me, some of your favorites there, because I usually close on this, but hey, you know what? Let's start on this.
Sure. Yeah. Can't keep the best for last when we're talking about it right now. First thing that comes to mind is flan. I really love flan. That was something that I was in a Spanish class in, I think it was high school, and we had to make a dish, and my mom helped me with like my grandma's recipe. And we brought that in and everyone loved it. But I get those kind of things all the time. Like when I'm down in Miami where my grandparents live, I get to have all their kinds of foods. We go to Pollo Tropical and get rice and beans and chicken and all that stuff. My grandpa loves vaca frita. I wasn't always a meat guy growing up, but I'm starting to open up to those kind of things. But yeah, it's, again, like I said, hopefully someday I can really go and experience the foods from where they actually are from versus going to a chain restaurant or something like that. But, hearing the stories from my grandparents and getting to try the foods that they're cooking from their experience and their heritage, it's really special and delicious too, obviously.
Oh God. Now, where are you on the heat meter? Do you like heat or kind of tone it down?
Yeah, I like things with a little bit of a kick, but I don't think I can handle as much as I would love to try. Like, if I'm getting wings at a place, I'll probably do like mild or maybe a low level hot type of thing. But I'm not going to test my limits because I've had some bad experiences where the nose starts running and you get lightheaded and all of that stuff. But I definitely do like flavorful, spicy things, just not anything too crazy.
Yeah, I know. It's I know coming from a Mexican side, sometimes becoming the heat meter it almost becomes like a challenge that I've lost that challenge a couple times, but I still like it. But yeah, don't let's not go crazy with it. No vamos tan locos, no tan locos. Oh man. Well, so obviously we wanted to talk about the Jets, and it's a whole new regime that we're talking about now. I mean, Robert Saleh comes in from the 49ers. We've seen the shots on the sideline. He obviously has a commanding presence, and you've seen the press conferences and everything. Can you kind of share a little bit about what this new regime is looking like, and especially kind of like what the scheme since there's so much coming from the Shanahan tree, and not just Kyle, we're talking about Mike Shanahan tree. When we're talking about that coming over to New York, what does the scheme look like from an offensive standpoint?
Well, I'll go back to the first part of your question in terms of just the person and this coaching staff that's coming in. What stood out to me the most is as different players have come through on Zooms and done pressers, whether it's a new player that was just signed in free agency or someone that was drafted or a veteran that's coming back, just over these last few months, it's pretty much been a consensus that everyone is really excited about the coaching staff that's come in, and they've admired and been fired up about Robert Saleh. And this is before training camp and the season, the preseason, any of that. This is just from those voluntary and then mandatory workouts in the off season and the conversations that they've had with Saleh and whoever else he's brought in, LaFleur, Ulbrich, those guys in this off season. It just seems like everything is turning around, and this franchise was, they were in the Gase era and things weren't going well. We're talking about a team that just won two games last year. And although it's going to take them some time to, transition back to contention, potentially in the next few years, it seems like everything off the field in terms of coaches and culture is definitely being turned in the right direction. In terms of the on the field aspects and how their offense is going to look, I'm excited to to watch in training camp and as they start to play games and have those reps against other teams to really see it, see it between the lines and get a glimpse of what it's going to look like during the regular season. But they've made an initiative to help up front and add offensive linemen. They got Elijah Vera Tucker in the draft, brought in Morgan Moses in free agency just a couple weeks ago. Joe Douglas the general manager has talked a lot about building through the draft and through the line. And, bringing in Carl Lawson and a couple veterans like Sheldon Rankins and Vinny Curry on the defensive line. It's clear that that's what they're trying to do to make this team better and make them a dangerous opponent. They may not make a postseason, but it seems like you don't want to play this team this year when you're a contender because they're going to be sneaky good, and it's going to take a really good game from your side to beat the Jets. And that says a lot coming from, like I said, a team that won 2 wins last year. And it ties into the way the offense is going to look, the way that all of these inexperienced and young players are going to be out there getting experience and having all those reps and turning into better players and contributors in the long run with the coaching staff and the culture and just the franchise as a whole taking steps in the right direction.
Well, I think you talk about young players, new players, and I don't think there's a bigger name than the number 2 pick in the draft, Zach Wilson. He's coming in. He's got the big smile. He's got the great hair. He's got the golden arm, and there's so much expectations from him. But I mean, when it comes down to it, there have been expectations on every new quarterback that's come to New York since the last 50 years, since Joe Namath. And and this is New York. The fan base is rabid. The media is not not a cakewalk like some other cities. What is what is the expectations from him, and could they actually be a little too outlandish to think that this is someone who has to live up to maybe like a Justin Herbert type of rookie season or something like that?
Well, it is New York, like you said, so the expectations are always going to be high and astronomically high, let's be honest. But I have been really impressed with the way that he's gone about his business so far, the way that he's been interacting with his new teammates off the field and going to hockey games together and going out to dinner. And, we've heard from other players that he's already showing how much of a leader he is and how much he cares, how much dedication and motivation he has to succeed at this next level. But yeah, just you hear from coaches and how he's always in the film room already. We haven't even gotten to, a couple weeks before the season yet, and how he's working hard behind the scenes and getting ready because, let's face it, he's the number 2 pick. Although he kind of, blossomed before our eyes in the last couple of years at BYU, he wasn't necessarily always viewed a top pick all the way through his college career. But he had an impressive junior season, and all the scouts and all the analysts and pundits seem to think that he's going to be, dangerous at the next level. I don't know how he'll translate facing NFL defenses, so I'm excited to see how that goes. And, in training camp, joint practices are going to be pretty telling too. And once the season gets underway, I think he'll start week 1 and start all the way through. He is the franchise quarterback, right? But he also fits into the system. He has some mobility. He's able to throw on the run. He's got a powerful golden arm. Like you said, he's going to be able to push the ball downfield, but use his legs and milk in the running game, something that's going to be important in this offense as well, spreading out the offensive line with a lot of moving pieces. And what didn't happen with Sam Darnold is happening now, in the sense that Douglas and Saleh and everyone involved, they're bolstering the offense around the quarterback. And injuries will happen, but bringing in Corey Davis, Keelan Cole, drafting Elijah Moore, all of these pieces that are around him now, who knows what we'll get from the tight end room, bringing in Tevin Coleman and drafting the running back. And, all of these different pieces are not going to necessarily make them a Super Bowl contender yet, but it puts Zach Wilson in the place to succeed. And now you can really get a glimpse in these first couple of years if he's going to be the answer at quarterback. There's no other excuse because he has the pieces around him.
And, speaking of the pieces, the wide receiver room, you mentioned Corey Davis. You got Elijah Moore came in on the draft. Keelan Cole came in free agency along with Davis. Holdovers, you got Jamison Crowder, Denzel Mims, who was a high draft pick last year. how, these are all players who are going to be fighting for targets this year. Can you kind of help us decipher or figure out, will there be a significant target leader, or or is this something that could be spreading the targets around among, and who would be some of the players who are rising to the top?
Sure. Well, I think that when Corey Davis was talking, he made it clear that he expects and wants to be like a number one type of receiver. And I think based on his track record and how he performed in Tennessee, as long as he stays healthy and if he's able to gel with Wilson, I think we'll see that from him. It's just a matter of having such a versatile and deep group. It seems like a pretty deep wide receiver room. Maybe he won't get as many targets because Elijah Moore has gotten so much time with Wilson this offseason. Maybe they have a really good connection and Wilson tries to find him during a game. Or Jamison Crowder comes in as the veteran, the elder statesman of that group who has all this experience and was the leading receiver for this team last year. Maybe Wilson relies on him. And then I think Denzel Mims doesn't get talked about enough, a player that was really highly touted coming out of Baylor and didn't get to play a full season last year. I think we may be able to see him really blossom into a top receiver type of player that has the threat to be, making explosive plays down the field, but also in the short passing game and over the middle of the field with his wingspan and his ability to make big plays. So then you mix in the likes of Keelan Cole and the other receivers that are not as big names, but have been around in the league for a while that have the capabilities to make an impact. So on any given snap, when Wilson is dropping back to pass, I think he's going to have a lot of different options. And maybe it's not an offense where it's just one clear-cut top receiver. We may see a lot of different players have solid seasons and 600 to 1,000 yards receiving or something like that, because I think Crowder last year was in the 600s and he led the team. But again, that was with an offense that Darnold was struggling and Joe Flacco was playing 4 or 5 games. So many people were hurt. They didn't play a full year. So if everyone can stay healthy and Saleh and LaFleur's offense really starts to click, I think it's a talented group that the passing game is going to be really good. But they've got to run the football too. The offensive line has to protect Wilson, and they've got to hold on to the football. Turnovers have been an issue for this team in the past as well.
Well, let's talk about running the football. You've got coming from the Shanahan offense the past several years in San Francisco. There's no 1,000 yard running back on that team. It's everybody's sharing the load. There was a 4th round draft pick in Michael Carter. So he's coming. Obviously, there's something to be looked at with he got picked by the new regime. There are holdovers with LaMichael Pirine, Ty Johnson, and Tevin Coleman, who comes from the San Francisco side. Can you help kind of, is this a committee or could there be somebody rising to the top? I mean, I guess the draft capital says it could be Michael Carter. Can you help us kind of look through the glass a little bit?
Sure. I think it'll be telling based on who gets reps once training camp begins and early on in the season. Frank Gore was leaned on quite a bit last year, so we really didn't get to see what Pirine is capable of, and he was a 4th round pick, I believe it was. So he does have the talent. It's just a matter of whether or not he's a premier back at this next level, which I'm not quite sure of yet. And by bringing in Tevin Coleman and drafting Carter, I think it's clear that Pirine maybe isn't the top answer as of now. But like you said, we've seen with offenses like this in the past, it's very much a running back by committee and maybe just going with the hot hand. If someone's playing well for a couple weeks in a row, they get more carries. And who's going to be good in the passing game out of the backfield too, with the moving parts of this offense. And Wilson being able to use his feet, maybe those plays end up being really important in this offense. The shovel passes out into the flat and having a running back always available if the guys down the field aren't open, if you're playing against a talented secondary. So, it's a good group. I don't think we can sleep on Ty Johnson or Josh Adams. Those guys had a lot of reps last year too. And maybe those names aren't, they're not the flashiest names. Maybe they're not household names, which they aren't, but that entire group is going to distinguish themselves. Who's going to really be the top guy? And again, Tevin Coleman's been around for a while And Salah's familiar with him from their time in San Francisco. Same with LaFleur too. So I'd expect that he gets a lot of run, but he's older, and I don't think it's going to be a situation where it's just Derrick Henry running the entire season. I think that would be a detriment to the team. So by having the flexibility and the depth there, that's going to be a good thing, I think.
So no caballo de batalla, I guess,
Right.
from this group.
Yeah.
Well, on the tight end side, last year at this time, Chris Herndon was getting a lot of attention, a lot of hype as potential that third year guy, that third year tight end to take the next step forward. Didn't happen. 31 receptions. Is with so many mouths to feed on the wide receiver side, and you've also got Michael Carter, who catches a fair amount of passes. Is the pecking order, is Chris Herndon kind of down in the pecking order when it comes down to it, from when it comes to targets?
Right. I would say that he's the top tight end option as of now, but it does seem like a very receiver primary type of offense, at least based on looking at the depth chart right now. There are a lot of different veterans at tight end that, they bring in Tyler Kroft, and they have guys like Griffin and Wesco, and even Kenny Yeboah is obviously new, but he's an undrafted guy that had a lot of people talking about him, and he's from Ole Miss, if I'm not mistaken. So a really good school in terms of receivers coming out, like Elijah Moore. So yeah, I mean, it'll depend on how the offense works, but we've seen this type of offense just in San Francisco. It's bigger names at tight end, but tight ends play a big role in the success of this offense. And I think it'll come down to the relationship that Wilson has when the football's in his hands with those tight ends. And if he jives early on with one of them, we could see a big bounce back year from Herndon, maybe a breakout year. Otherwise, it's just going to be tight end by committee, in my opinion. I don't think it'll be as big of an impact position as it was in San Francisco with the guys that they have out there, and this same type of offense like I was just talking about. But who knows? I mean, Herndon's been working hard. He had the drops and the injury-riddled seasons in the past, and the expectations haven't been fulfilled just yet. But coming in, he's got to be hungry for a big year this year. New quarterback with a lot of eyes on him, new receiver core with a lot of eyes on them. Maybe under the radar, Herndon can have a sneaky good year. We'll see.
So I like to always ask a question about the offensive line, because I think the offensive line is one of the underrated factors in any team's fantasy success. And obviously you had the number one draft pick in Mekhi Becton last year, who was, I think one of your articles had picked out that he was ranked, I think it was number 7. Was it number 6 or number 7 overall in the NFL? And also another article, I like it that there with him and Vera Tucker, another first round draft pick, calling them the Bash Brothers on the left side of the line. And you mentioned Joe Douglas really wanting to build through the line. How much of a step forward does this group need to take, considering the fact Pro Football Focus has them ranked going into the season at number 28. So they've got some work to do.
Yeah, there's room to grow, but I think they are set on the left side for years to come. And I've said this before in general and on this interview as well. I mean, injuries do happen, and Becton has battled a couple injuries. He's got a foot thing going on right now, so he hasn't been able to be on the field too much this offseason. But look, you have two of the top young offensive linemen in Vera Tucker and Becton, and that's your new quarterback's blind side that's now protected for the foreseeable future. I mean, you have to feel really good about that. As much as Becton and Vera Tucker haven't necessarily proven themselves yet at this next level, Becton had moments last year, but he's got to figure out how to stay on the field and really blossom into the potential that he has. But it's clear that this team really liked Vera Tucker. I mean, they went up and they spent a lot in terms of draft capital to get him in the first round. And he was viewed as their top guard going into this draft. I think a lot of teams viewed him that way. So to have him and his versatility, he was able to play tackle at USC. Who knows where they'll put him? I think I expect him to be at left guard. But also signing Morgan Moses and having George Fant, not your right tackle, but more of a flex type of guy that's going to be able to fill in and give guys rest and fill in when injuries do inevitably happen. Moses is the the epitome of durability and experience in this league. That's why a lot of teams were trying to get him this offseason, late in the offseason. So to use your cap space and your financial flexibility to get somebody like that that's going to shore up now the right side, and in an offense that's using the whole field when they're running, and with Wilson's mobility, to have your two tackle positions be reliable offensive linemen, I think is huge for this team. You know, they're not necessarily just going to be running it up the gut every single play, at least in my estimation. So to have the ability to now spread the offense out and know that Wilson isn't going to be on the ground every single play, like we saw with Darnold quite a bit over the last few years. He was sacked a lot and pressured a lot. So yeah, it's not perfect. They still have to figure out the internal offensive line guys and where they're going to go from there, if they want to bring certain guys back for the long run or potentially draft in that way moving forward. But yeah, like I said with the defensive line too, it's clear that Douglas is building this team through the line. And maybe in a couple of years, they've got one of the best offensive and defensive lines in the National Football League.
And on the defensive side, you know, you mentioned that the defensive line was decent. I think they were number 12 in rushing yards allowed, but the secondary was number 30 in passing yards allowed. I mean, it was not pretty. Obviously, there's the Raider game where there was the walk off there for walk off touchdown to Henry Ruggs, but there were some on the back half of the draft. There was some draft capital used on the defensive backs, cornerbacks, and safeties. How much of a step forward, or is this still going to be a team that has a lot of growing pains in the secondary?
Yeah, it's a really young and inexperienced secondary, a group that has a lot of room to grow together. I think that the negotiations with Marcus May and how those didn't turn into an extension, that's a pretty notable thing, because now it's almost like May is just going to be counting down the days until he can actually test free agency next year, because clearly the relationship that they had kind of soured this offseason because he wasn't going to get the money that he thought that he deserved. And he was going to be their guy to mentor all these younger folks in the secondary. Obviously, he's a safety, but what do you expect from Ashton Davis, a guy that they drafted, not this past draft, the one before that? Is he going to be their future safety? Because they don't have Jamal Adams anymore either, obviously. And they've brought in a couple cornerbacks, and Bryce Hall, I think, is potentially the guy that could blossom into a top cornerback in the next few years, but none of them are proven yet. And, you bring in a guy like LaMarcus Joyner, who's going to provide some experience and a veteran voice. But I was a little surprised they didn't try to go out and get someone like Richard Sherman. Obviously, there's stuff off the field with Sherman now, but if you have the money and the space to bring someone in like that, that's going to help, even if they don't have that much of an impact on the field, which then would be a sacrifice for that player because they're not contending. But they can help turn this unit into more of a competent group and a group that's going to be really potent in years to come. So look, we'll see what Saleh is able to do in terms of who gets playing time. I think going into the year, it's going to be an interesting storyline to watch because there is no top guy. So we're going to see who ends up covering the top receivers in the first couple weeks of the year and who's taking steps to get even better as time goes by. But I think we may see the secondary torn apart a little bit this year, like we did see quite a bit last year. But the defensive line has taken a lot of steps forward, and I think that if they're going to put pressure on opposing quarterbacks and kind of corral the run game, maybe it'll take the edge off of a unit that you can't always rely on in the secondary.
No, that's awesome. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you mentioned, Saleh coming from the defensive side, and it's kind of hard to expect him to have a bad defense for very long, because I mean, even last year when the 49ers had tons of injuries on that side of the ball, they were still, better than average, kind of surprisingly. Well, I mean, from the Jets side, I mean, that's taken care of. I got one more fun one. We talked about food a little bit ago. You're in New York City. Can I get good tacos in New York City? And do you have any favorites?
Yeah, there's I don't remember the name of it, but there's one on it's really close to my house, my apartment building. It's, I think, 43rd between 8th and like where Times Square is. So I guess that's 7th, but I don't think Broadway is there just yet. And it's a little like hole in the wall type place that I've only been once, but there's always a line going out the door. So I'm going to have to look this up after we record, and I'll get you the name. But yeah, there's plenty of places. You go to other boroughs too. I mean, I'm usually in Manhattan, obviously, because I live there, but there's tons of places that are indigenous to their neighborhoods. When you go up into the Bronx or Queens or Brooklyn, and now I'm listing all the boroughs, so Staten Island too. But yeah, and my mom makes some really good food in that sense too, with tacos, and I'm a big burrito guy, so I love going to those types of places. As much as Chipotle is easy because it's around the corner, you got to get the real stuff too.
The real stuff. Any favorite taco meats, taco fillings?
I usually switch things up. I mean, just like from my Chipotle order, for example, like I'll do chicken more often, but I like barbacoa. I like steak, as long as it's not too like rubbery, because that happens sometimes when it's the smaller pieces. But you really can't go wrong with good chicken, with the seasoning and all the amenities in there too. I think that's probably my top option.
Oh yeah, it's hard to mess that up. Hard to mess that up. I'm a big carne asada fan, but yeah, you're right. If it's not made right, it's just it's a letdown. It's a huge letdown. Well, I'll tell you what, this was not a letdown. You delivered. I mean, just like New York City, always coming up big. I mean, it's one of my favorite cities. So thank you for kind of taking me back there, taking us behind the Jets. Mi amigo, fue un gran placer. Te lo agradezco mucho. So kind of to sign off, where can people find you for find all your work? Because actually, you're about to get into the really nitty gritty. Are you getting all your sleep right now before you got to juggle the Yankees and the Jets at the same time?
Yeah, I'm trying my best. The free time is usually when I get home from Yankee Stadium late at night. So we were talking about this before we started recording. Like, I'm usually not awake in the mornings because I'm trying to catch up on sleep. But yeah, I mean, as much as it's busy and it's overwhelming at times, I couldn't be more excited about all of it because I'm new to the industry, and to be able to cover teams from where I grew up and get that experience of covering teams in such a big market, I think that I'm setting myself up for success in the long run, no matter where I end up in the span of my career for decades from now. So I'm super fortunate, very, very lucky and humble about all of this. And yeah, I mean, I'm working hard, but it's the best type of busy. As a sports journalist, you can't ask for much more. And these two teams that we're talking about are trending in the right direction. The Yankees weren't in the best place starting off this season, and they may not make the playoffs, but it's the Yankees. They're always there with the money that they have and the stars that they have. And the Jets, I think, are going to take a big step forward this year. Again, they might not make the playoffs, but we might be looking at a 6 or 7 win team that's going to hang up there with the big boys in the division. And who knows, in a couple of years, they may be contending once again, depending on how Wilson and all those pieces that are young start to do. So it's an exciting time to be a New York sports fan. And for me, exciting to be around those teams.
Oh, man. And where can people find your work?
Right. So I'm on Twitter at Max T. Goodman. That's basically all of my Yankees stuff day to day. So we'll see if I'm able to spice in some Jets things as the season gets underway. But the Jets site is called Jets Country. It's si.com/NFL/Jets. And then the Yankees one is si.com/MLB/Yankees inside the pinstripes. And yeah, all my articles are there. I'm posting pretty much every day on both. So it's been a grind, but like I said, best type of grind I could have.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, hey, mi amigo, many blessings to you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I know in a couple of years, I'm going to be saying, oh, I knew that guy when. So, but you're still going to be obligated to do this interview. So
yeah. Let me know if you ever want me to come back on. It was a blast. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's such a good time. And everybody, gracias everybody for joining us. Eso es todo for our show. Thanks again to Max for joining us, Max Goodman, and thanks to Anchor for being our hosting network, as well as to YouTube for hosting our video side. Please make sure you subscribe at YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find original content, including a write-up on this article on familiaffb.com. You can find me at Jorge Martin 17. You could also on Twitter, and you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at familiaffb. Otra vez, thanks to Max for joining us. Thank you to the Familia community for joining us. And remember, everybody, todos somos familia.